Okay, let's get started. So welcome either to those of you that are here live or those of you that are actually watching this after the fact. Um, this is the Thursday afternoon version of the web chat. And I say Thursday afternoon, I mean Thursday afternoon Toronto time, because if you're elsewhere in the world, it will be a totally different time. So the conversation, the discussion, the area I want to go through today is about keeping calm when others can't, successfully navigating a world of disruption. And the reason this came to light for me is that I've been doing a lot of activity over the last couple of years dealing with how organizations and individuals can successfully cope, navigate, work through, come out the other side better when they are presented with that unplanned change that's maybe not as expected. And this prompted me, with everything else going on in the world at the moment, that this might be a good time to just offer my thoughts on this front and see how people think about this. So let's start off by talking about this. So for those of you that are staring at the screen wondering what I'm talking about, it's the elephant in the room. Let's talk about why this even webinar is existing, this conversation is existing at the moment. The reason is because we're dealing with an unprecedented situation. We're dealing with circumstances because of COVID-19, the novel coronavirus, that actually is impacting everybody's personal, professional, physical, mental, circumstantial relationship being. Everything that makes you who you are and how you perform is involved in this challenge. And I myself am experiencing a lot of disruptive change and having to navigate multiple things going on at the same time. And, you know, let's call it out for what it is. We are dealing with a pandemic that we haven't had to deal with the likes of before. And this is causing people to look at the way they work, look at the way they operate, and look at the way they look after themselves and their families and others they care for in different and new ways. And I wanted to kind of have a conversation and a sharing of my thoughts on how this can be considered. So what we're experiencing at the moment is a feeling that the world is like blowing up with everything. It's like total and utter chaos, not knowing what's going on. Our responses, maybe this is a little bit of extreme, but our responses are ones of either surprise, fear, anger, you know, whatever it may be. We're really not too sure how to deal with this change. And there's a bit of confusion going on. Maybe a little bit of confused anxiety as well, because this disruption is throwing us into considerations that we haven't had to deal with before. So what we're being challenged to is like the three monkeys on screen here. What can we hide from, not see? What do we avoid hearing? And what do we avoid saying? You know, the old story goes of the three monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Well, maybe evil is a bit of a strong word, but everybody that I speak to and engage with since this current crisis has erupted, whether it's professionally or personally, has been challenged with knowing what can they get people to look at, what can't they get people to look at, what are people expected to hear about, what are people expected to find out for themselves, what can I actually talk and engage. And this really sums it up, because this challenge of how do I engage with people is really difficult. So what we're going to talk about over the coming 45 minutes-ish, something like that. We're going to talk about curiosity, agility, resilience, and leadership as key components that help you navigate this disruption. We're actually going to talk about Carl. Carl's experience. Whoever Carl may be, Carl is the flag bearer of curiosity, agility, resilience, and leadership. And how does he cope in times of crisis and disruption? How does he cope by understanding the change instigators, the change considerations? But before we get into that, let's just backtrack a moment. Let's just remind ourselves that all disruptions are changes. Disruption equals change. And I want to share with you a little bit about my own insight here and where my work around this disruptive stuff has been going over the last couple of years or so. When we talk about disruptive change, we're not talking about having these nice planned out changes. You know, I used a representation of a typical project Gantt chart on screen. We don't have these things. We can't predict, you know, unless there's anybody out there who's got a working crystal ball, you're not going to know what's going to be happening. So these are out of the window. These are gone. These are not available. These are not possible. When you're dealing with disruptive change, you're dealing with a number of key elements. First of all, volatility. Volatility is that almost insecurity. Everything's on the edge. It's the sitting on the close proximity to the edge and not quite knowing where you're going to go. It's the idea that you think, look to yourself personally, how you're experiencing everything that's going on with the current crisis, and think, how volatile are you feeling? How close to exploding are you? Where is your limit point? Where is your organization's limit point? At what point do things go bang? We're also dealing with uncertainty. Do we know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month? We don't know how long this is going to go on for. We seriously don't know where the tipping points are going to happen when we're seeing our way out to the other side. And how our people around us react, whether it's in an organization or elsewhere. It's a challenge. And that uncertainty is difficult. We have a complexity of options ahead of ourselves. We've only got to sit back and look at all the different ways that many different governments and organizations have reacted. Some reacted weeks ago, some are only reacting now. Complexity, when we label complexity, is a recognition that there are multiple endpoints that we could get to, but we don't know what any of them look like. We often use the word complexity in error, actually. We often use complexity when we actually mean complicated, because it's just like, we know it's one of 6 options. It's just a bit hard to get to which one we want. But complexity is all about discussing and exploring the fact that we're living in a space where no matter what our action is today, the reaction or the response that it ends up with going forward is unpredictable. We just don't know what it is. And we could go down many, many paths before we find one that works. And all of this comes down to the ambiguity, the confusion. What do they mean by that word? What does this word mean? We talk a lot at the moment with the COVID situation around social isolation. And yet, actually, we're not talking about social isolation. We're talking about physical isolation that impacts social interaction. And it's fascinating that there's an ambiguity of definition of words. But because it got picked up in media, that's what we had to deal with. And I hope that we've got the presence to question. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But to question, are we using the right words for what we're doing? So those 4 phrases I used there: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. As a grouping, they're a well-known terminology. A terminology taken by taking the first letter of each one of those words. VUCA, V-U-C-A. VUCA is a word that actually came about through the US military back in the late 80s. And you can look up stuff online, and I'm not going to go through the full history, but effectively it was the first point in time it was used, was recognizing situations that were not the normal planned structured situations that we've been used to. And slowly over the last 20 to 30 years, it's been taken forward and brought into some of us vocabulary who talk about change in a VUCA world. And change in a VUCA world is disruptive change. And what we're dealing with now and today is totally VUCA. Now, what sorts of other things do we use VUCA to represent these days? Well, when we talk about the way the world is changing, and we talk about all the different stuff, typically, you know, Industrial Revolution 4.0, Industry 4.0, whatever label, the modern evolution that's happened in the way industry and everything is taking forward. We have robotics, big data. Well, you can read what I have up on screen there. But it's fascinating how all of these things are so recent in the evolution and development of the way we work and the way we create things. And this is why VUCA has actually come to prominence, and why me personally, I've done stuff over the last few years, because people don't know how to manage change in these environments. And we've had to kind of throw away some of the traditional models and methodologies because of this, to help individuals and groups go through change in a VUCA environment. So let's start off with Carl's journey. Where's Carl going to go first? Well, I want Carl to cultivate his curiosity. So what do we mean? Well, curiosity is disruptive. No matter where we look at things, whatever we do, whenever people say somebody's being curious, sometimes they mean it with a little bit of disrespect, because a curious person is questioning the rule book. Why are we doing that? Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? Why are we doing things the way we've never done it before? Why can't we do it differently? In this situation that we're faced with today, the rule book is out the window. We do not have those rule book norms. Now, we have a framework maybe we can operate within, but I know many, many organizations and individuals working in those organizations that are feeling uncomfortable because we're asking people to work from home, yet follow the rules. But they can't follow the rules because they don't have access to the same things at home that they did in the workplace. Whether that's paper, whether that's technology, whatever it may be, it's challenging. But we also have to be willing to question. Because when we start to question things, we start to recognize what the disruption means, where the disruption has come from, where the disruption can go. One of the biggest challenges of our day is the use of social media. And using all those different platforms, the amount of misinformation, poor quality content is mind-blowing. And it's interesting because so many people are afraid to challenge what they see on social media. They accept it as being the truth. Yet we need to be willing to disrupt the content. You need to feel comfortable to go out there and say, where have you got that evidence from? Where does that information come from? Just because you saw it published on the internet, is it right? Doesn't mean that case. Curiosity disrupts these things because curiosity is often seen as insubordination in its purest form. And I love Nabokov's quote here from his writings, because so many people are more comfortable in the status quo rather than pushing the edge, pushing beyond the edge. And yet that's what we need to do when we want to be curious. We need to be able to push beyond the edge, beyond the current. Being curious in a time of challenge, in a time of disruption, in a time of crises, is such a powerful tool, because it gives us the energy, it gives us the willpower to ask questions. Questions like, what does this mean to me? There's nothing wrong with asking that question. People think this is a very selfish question sometimes. But ask yourself, what does this mean to me? But then, how does it affect other people? Do look beyond yourself. Think about how this is affecting other people. How is that different from you? What are they experiencing? How do your actions, when you respond to things, influence others? Are the words that you use, the actions you do, impacting others' ability to cope and manage their way through disruptive change? And remember, the question you need to be asking is, what do we need? Not what we would like, not what would be nice to have. What do we need? At times of crisis, at times of disruption, at times of challenge. What we need is what's important to us, and that will satisfy our needs. So, curiosity is all about the right questions. As Albert Einstein said, the important thing is not to stop questioning, never to lose your holy curiosity. When you're dealing with a time of disruption and challenge, you need to feel comfortable and you need to have confidence to ask questions about it. It's not the time to revert inside your shell. It's the time to ask questions, to understand how things are impacting. So curiosity is the first area I want to really focus on. But that's just seeing Carl. Let's start getting Carl engaged in agility. Let's see if he can flex and bend. Let's see if we can develop flexibility. Now, when I talk about agility, I'm talking about the ability to be nimble, to be able to be responsive in a way that doesn't break, doesn't crack, is demonstrating that capacity to move to somewhere new, somewhere different. And this stops people from worrying about what might happen. When we're dealing with times of challenge or times of crises, helping people to deal with things and helping people to encourage themselves to be agile about things is truly helping people to maintain and look after their mental and physical health and well-being in the workplace. We've all had to be agile as we've been told to work from home. Yes, there are essential services that cannot have that opportunity. But for the majority of us, we're now being agile and creating workspaces like we've never done before. But what does agility look like in practice? What are we talking about here? And this is about the way you interact with other people, whether in a workplace, or just in personal relationships. Agility is about flexible decision making. It's not about saying it's right or wrong. It's about saying, well, let's go with this route and see where we get to. Agility is about accepting what's good enough. We don't have to be getting to perfection all the time. We get so caught up in trying to do everything to everybody that we sometimes lose track of speaking to anybody. Accepting that what we've done is good enough at that moment in time is perfectly acceptable. Focusing on learning versus blaming. It's not about who did what wrong. It's about what happened and how do we learn so it doesn't happen again. Demonstrating agility means that if you say something and somebody doesn't like it, you don't blame yourself. You learn from that experience not to do it again. And typically in a professional environment, we talk about customer or consumer focus for being agile. Agility is about thinking about who is consuming your words, your behaviors, your efforts. Think about who is actually going to be receiving what you do and focus on what they will see. I have a wonderful example of being agile very, very recently in terms of this crisis. And it was creating some communications for a higher education establishment. And the people who had written this had written it from a viewpoint of the academics. And it was wonderfully written, about 3 pages long of quoted why we could do what we did because of this rule and that rule and this rule and that rule. But from a student's viewpoint, the consumer of the education, they wouldn't have had a clue what was written in there. They'd have probably switched off 2 paragraphs in and gone, yeah, whatever. So I helped them to actually reposition their focus, to focus from the viewpoint of the consumer or the student in this case. And this is really important. Out of all the elements of the agility, I think this is probably the most important when we're dealing with these times of challenge. We need to think about what will the other person see, hear, receive from us, and make sure that fits with their world and their expectations. Now, after agility and all that stuff around curiosity to begin with, you've heard me talking a lot about people's well-being, their mental health, etc. So let's talk about how Carl can develop resilience to navigate disruption. How can he actually build himself up to be more resilient? It's not easy. Change resiliency is a challenge, but it is possible. So when we talk about resiliency, defining resilience, and this is the Oxford English Dictionary definition of resilience, it states it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, a toughness, and the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. Now, on a personal level, what this talks about is the ability for individuals to cope when things are challenging. And I'm not sure I like the word toughness, but I would say that maybe it's more of a durability. It's the ability to be durable when times are difficult and challenging. And after those times finish, that person is able to come back to where they were before. They have the capacity to regroup and rediscover their previous existence. Now, when we talk about resilience, there's lots and lots of activities out there and books you can read and all sorts of stuff that's available on building resilience. And for me, one of the most informative pieces of resilience building I ever saw was something that talked about the impact of lacking resilience. And it said, we've all got levels of resilience, a bit like a personal fitness routine. And we exercise the muscles of resilience based on capacity, capability. But when we have little or no resilience, what happens? Stress. Stress is what happens. And a bit like this writing here, the S at the beginning might seem a bit firm, but as you work your way through the letters, they slowly lose form and shape. And that's what happens to people when they're under stress. They start to lose that durability, that capacity to cope. Stress is painful, and people experiencing pain find it difficult to cope. But there are ways to get around it. And one of the most important pieces is to recognize your own personal energy. So I've talked about this in many situations with many people. The idea that you have a personal emotional bank account. And there's a few phrases out there about this that talk to various things and relationship stuff. And I know there's some stuff out there that were written by Covey and things like that talk about this. But my interpretation of this is really about discussing how you make sure you've got the energy, emotionally, mentally, to sustain yourself through the challenges of difficult times. Because if you don't, a bit like going to your bank ATM, it says you've got nothing left in the bank. You've got nothing there to cope with. Your capacity has been exhausted. So what does this mean? What am I talking about with an emotional bank account? Well, think like a bank account. And for a lot of us, unfortunately, this is probably something that's going to be very relevant over the coming weeks and maybe months as work shifts and things like that. But let's think about you internally. Let's think about looking after you on an individual basis, personally. What we're talking about here is you have a capacity, an energy level to cope with the world around you, to cope with the news that you read, to cope with the messages, to support your questioning, to support your ability to be agile and focus on where you need to do. And you need to make sure that that is fully charged. And we need to think about everything that we do each day either puts energy in or takes energy out. And, you know, simple things like getting a good night's sleep, undertaking some reasonable, healthy exercise, eating healthy foods, taking time away from the screen to just spend time with your own thoughts. Maybe having some fun time taking the dog for a walk or playing with kids in the park. These are all things that can actually put energy into your bank account. Now, obviously, some of those things are not available to us at the moment because of the circumstance we're in. So we have to focus on those things that can produce energy. And one of those things that is key at a time of challenge where we're all being told to go home, work behind closed doors, is that we keep connected. Human connectivity is really important. Whether it's creating, you know, virtual coffee meetings, have a coffee chat with a colleague or a friend. Find somebody to have your Thursday night happy hour drink of wine with and do it virtually and chat. Make sure you're maintaining that connectivity because there's a lot of stuff at this time of crisis that's going to be taking withdrawals from your energy bank account. Every time you get angry and frustrated, every time you're trying to challenge doing something in a different space to what you've been used to, it's all going to cause you challenges and problems if you don't look after your energy account. So think about this emotional bank account as being your own personal energy ins and outs. Think about it as a way of balancing your credits and debits for positive energy. Make sure you're getting sleep. It's very easy for us to spend time at home, not physically active, and thinking we don't need the same level of sleep as we do. But we should still be getting that rest and recuperation period. You need to make sure that you're at least putting in what you need to take out. Because if you start taking out more than you've got put in, you're going to start to crumble. You're not going to be able to cope, and you're going to start getting stressed more and more. And that can make you not just mentally ill, but physically ill, as it manifests itself in a whole range of different ways that are challenging and difficult. So, although there are many aspects on resilience, I think the key pieces about resilience at these sort of times is to make sure that you're recognizing yourself, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, that you're recognizing the need to continue as much as possible with social and personal interactions, that you're recognizing that just because you're working at home, it doesn't mean that this is too challenging for you to still be constructive. It means also looking at things around you, considering what you're eating, what you're doing. Are you taking time out? Maybe you don't have a commute time now. How are you using that commute time? Is there a podcast you want to listen to? An audio book to listen to? Or maybe a normal book? You know, we still have those that you've been always wanting to read. Take that time out to give yourself an emotional energy charge. Now, finally, the L, the leadership challenge. And this is really important for you to lean into being a demonstrator of true leadership behaviors. Yes, this is particularly evident when you're in a work environment. But when we talk about leadership, so often we talk about leadership in ways of these fantastic models and competency frameworks. And I'm guilty of that myself very often, because typically when we talk about leadership development, we're talking about, you know, senior positions in organizations needing leadership development. But all of us need to demonstrate leadership. And this model that I've got up on screen now is something I developed a few years back for the company in terms of key competencies in that professional capacity. And it's great for professional situation when we're in normality, or as close to normality as we can these days. But really, there's key aspects of how you as an individual can demonstrate leadership for you, those around you, those that you work with. And I kind of want to show what that looks like or what that needs to be. I want you to remember that leadership is in your control. And leadership must be focused on empowering and enabling people and individuals. If you have responsibility for somebody who works from home at the moment, let go of any controlling tendencies. You can't do it. It's not going to work. Be willing and able to let them do what they need to do to deliver what they need to do. Recognize, like we mentioned with agility, that people make mistakes. You make mistakes, but you accept them for the lessons that they give to you. What do you now know not to do? What do you now know that you need to learn something about? Maybe you weren't as capable of doing those web pages as you thought you were. Maybe you didn't write up the message in the right way. It's okay. You made a mistake. Own the mistake and learn it. Focus on what people's needs are. True leadership doesn't tell people. True leadership encourages people to discover for themselves. And that need is about people seeing themselves for who they are. But recognizing at times of crisis and challenge that when you're responding to person's needs, individuals' needs may be very different from what they would be at other times. So you need to demonstrate respect and objectivity. Don't judge for what those needs might be. Individuals are going to be challenging you in ways that you've never been challenged before. Whether you've got to engage with somebody to find out what work needs to be done, what work hasn't been done. Maybe a person has never spent an hour working at home before, and now you're asking them to work 40 hours a week at home. They might have needs because they don't know how these things operate. So respect the challenge that the individual might be experiencing and retain your objectivity. Leadership's role is to communicate. Yes, you have to be out there talking to people. You have to be out there sharing your thoughts, engaging with people. And again, I say communicate. I don't say telling, because when you communicate with people, it's a two-way process. It's engaged conversation. It's listening as well as speaking, not just telling and hoping for the best. And we need to recognize that true leadership, when it's expressed by individuals, demonstrates vulnerability and empathy. That means you have the permission to be vulnerable. Remember when we talked about the VUCA stuff earlier on, we mentioned volatility. For me, volatility is a representation of somebody who doesn't let go of their vulnerability. You get volatile because you're too protective of being vulnerable. So let's respect vulnerability as a strength and a courage, and empathize with others going through the challenges in a way that can hopefully help them. Remember, leadership is a behavior, not a title. And leadership can be demonstrated by anybody, no matter what their position, their role, or their activity space is. So, we've talked about curiosity, agility, resilience, and leadership. Focusing at these times of challenge in being comfortable questioning things. Being flexible in your approaches with a focus on what is being received, not what is being given out. Focusing on how you look after yourself, your own resiliency levels, looking at your own energy levels and how you actually need to compare those with those around you so that you're comparing what goes in and what goes out. And demonstrate leadership, whether you're actually a designated leader or not. Everybody needs somebody who can inspire and encourage them. So don't be afraid to show that. That will allow you to keep calm and carry on. And like Carl, you can connect the two things together to help you to focus on navigating this disruptive change. And that, my friends, is the end of the content for today's web chat. But now we get to the chat element of it. What questions do you have? What would you like to know? What aspects do you want to share?